Today, I am not going to tell you what to do. I don't know about you folks, but every once in a while you hear conference talks where they're like, oh, you should do this, blah, blah, blah. Like, no, I present to me the facts as you see them, and then let me make up my own mind, right? So I'm not going to shit on you, if you will. So instead, what I'm going to do is I'm going to explain why I do what I do, and why I've essentially chosen to bet my whole career on this whole crazy web thing, right? And why I think it's a better time than ever to do so. First of all, who in here is an investor? Anybody? Anybody claiming that title? We got a couple people. Okay. So betting has kind of this negative connotation, so I'm going to switch this to investing. And what is an investor? An investor is somebody who allocates scarce resources, usually money, and hopes to get a return on that somehow, right? So they allocate means put somewhere, so they hope to get a return on their investment. And you may not feel like it, but you actually possess an extremely rare resource. And that's your attention. And as smart, creative people, sometimes we kind of down on ourselves because we know everything else that's out there, and so we don't really realize that our attention is actually worth a lot. If you talk to an advertiser, they will quickly assure you of this, right? And it is very scarce. I mean, you can only spend it on one thing at a time, and you only have now in which to spend it, right? Like, this moment is spent listening to this fool, right? When someone out there is going, well, what about multitasking? I can multitask. So I'm going to follow a little tangent here. A good friend of mine does surgery on brains for a living, and he has this thing about multitasking. He basically says, nope. So as it turns out, I texted him before this. I was like, hey, I know you have this thing. Like, can you just tell me what that means? So this was his response. He said, yes, this is true. There is no actual true multitasking. Our conscious brain can only focus on one thing at a time. I'm not talking about chewing gum and walking. That's not focusing on, right? Even though that can be difficult sometimes. Is that just me? But basically, part of your prefrontal cortex controls what you are consciously focused on. And I find this super interesting. Switching focus from one thing to another actually takes time, in the range of 0.7 seconds, depending on who you talk to, right? So as a productivity nerd, I find that super fascinating, but it also proves this point. Like, your professional attention, if your attention is rare, your professional attention is even more scarce. What do I mean? Depending on who you talk to, depending on what their work ethic is, they will tell you you maybe can program really effectively for maybe 6 or so hours a day, right? So what? The point I'm trying to make here is we are all constantly investing. And we're investing something that's very scarce. And someone is going, oh, congratulations, Henrik, you just described what a job is. I go drop my time off, I drop my body off at the office, I spend my time, I get paid, I go home. Yeah, well, there's more to it than trading your hours for money. That's all kind of the short-term effects of things, right? In the long run, there's all kinds of other interesting consequences, other interesting results that come out of where we choose to invest our time. For example, we're building expertise, Most of us get paid essentially for our expertise. And as we work on something, we build that up, obviously. We're also creating equity in something. It's usually, often some company that's hiring us to build a product, like MailChimp or what have you, right? But that adds value to that company or that product. This one I find really fascinating, something that we don't really think about, but we're building tomorrow's legacy code today. I mean, but let's break this down just a little bit more. So the technology choices that you are making when you're building a new product actually affects what jobs are available down the road. Have you thought about that? Like, if you choose to build with a certain technology, very often the people that initially create a product are not the ones that ultimately have to maintain it years down the road. Probably be better for the quality of the project if they did have to maintain it down the road. But that's a whole other thing. The point is, you're literally shaping tomorrow's job market based on the technology choices you're making today on new products, which is kind of cool. Additionally, we create kind of this body of knowledge about whatever technology we happen to be involved in. So, we share answers on Stack Overflow. We're good at Googling and finding things. We write blog posts. And that all contributes to the set of problems that have been exposed and solved by the community and kind of this corpus of knowledge about whatever the thing is, right? So we're contributing to that all the time. Additionally, many of us do open source work too. We solve a problem once really well, and we never ever want to do it again. And so we bundle it up in a nice little library or something and put it on NPM or what have you. And that adds tremendous value to the community, right? That's a huge investment. I mean, imagine the amount, if everybody had to rewrite everything from scratch all the time and we couldn't just download something from NPM that solved our problem, the amount of enormous, value that's there is definitely something we contribute to based on what we choose to spend our time doing. And ultimately, last but not least, if there were no software for a platform, there is no platform. We are creating applications and things for users on whatever the platform is. So that also adds value to the platform itself. If you look at this list, very little of it has to do with you at all. Expertise and equity, maybe. But everything else is about the kind of long-term effects of what we do in terms of how we spend our time. So we're investing in a platform, community, and a set of technologies, right? OK, so you can't talk about investing without talking about risk. That's kind of why there's reward involved, is because there's some uncertainty involved, right? So assuming that we're so selfish investors here and we only have so much time to spend, what risks are we exposed to? Well, you might ask, OK, so are we building for the right platform? As it turns out, this is an actual thing, right? Platforms can go away. Just ask a Flash developer, or a Windows Phone developer, or a BlackBerry developer. I mean, it may be a little harsh to say they've gone away, but they certainly don't have the same level of status as some of these other ones, right? So platforms can go away. See that? That's the only visual element in my talk. So I feel really bad after Eunice talk about diagrams and stuff. So that's all I got. Sorry. But if we look at what these things have in common, we can draw a few threads at least. Maybe there's something we can glean from this. So first of all, they're all closed platforms. And I don't mean closed like the door's closed. I mean there's a single controlling interest, right, usually. And when you're developing for these platforms, you're building for a specific, operating system, essentially. So you're coding against a particular implementation, some certain version of some OS or something, right? As opposed to coding against a set of open standards, which is what we do on the web, which inherently means there can be multiple implementations that can handle our code, which actually is a lot of diversity if you think about it. Yeah, there may not be that many browser engines, but there's nothing stopping someone new from shipping a new browser. As long as they implement the specs, they can compete, right? So if one shuts down, someone else can come up in their place, right? You could argue this, but Flash, potentially you could say it kind of died, at least in part, because it was closed, right? Jobs didn't want some other company to have kind of, I don't know his internal motivations, but, at least in theory, this is part of the reason it kind of went away, right? So, but what we can draw from this, and from a risk perspective, is that open is probably better than closed from how likely is it to disappear, right? The web is incredibly open, right? Beautifully open, yes. So I love that. And you could, as far as Windows Phone and BlackBerry, you could argue that, maybe it's lack of interested users, or maybe it was lack of interested developers. I don't know. But certainly interest is important. Maybe if he had just said developers one more time, we would have all been using Windows phones right now. I don't know. But again, from a risk mitigation perspective, more is certainly better than few. More users is certainly better than few. And the point of all this is there's no bigger, more popular open platform on the web. I don't know of one. I don't think one exists. I don't think one has ever existed. And that's pretty amazing. So I would say from that perspective, betting on the web seems like a pretty fair choice, right? OK. So fine, but what about the software we're actually building? Like a lot of us are building, apps. We used to build applications, but that wasn't nearly cool enough. So now we build like apps, man. Yeah. Anyway, the point is like, I won't do that again. It was really bad. But from a user's perspective, what exactly is an app? And I would argue that the term has actually changed over the years. Like as far as users go, they didn't think of installing apps back in the day when they were running Windows 3.1. But these days, you ask somebody what an app is. It's essentially a thing I put on my phone, right? Like that's pretty much it to a user. As developers and as the nerd that I am, I want to define it more specifically. I would define it as kind of this ad hoc user interface. It's a really nerdy way to put it. That is kind of local-ish to the device. How's that for vague? So ad hoc, if you're not familiar, it's Latin. It literally means for this. And that actually lines up really well with what Apple has been telling us, Apple's marketing team has been telling us. I have this problem. Well, there's an app for that, right? The point is, it helps you do something, right? And then I think that's kind of if you really dumb it down, I would say that's the difference between these two, right? Whereas a site might be, like take a news site, like it's a resource to read that article. But you might have an app that like helps you read news articles. It helps you do the thing, right? To me, that's where the distinction lies. You think of it as a book, it's a resource, versus a tool, something that helps you read a book, right? So then the question is, from a selfish investor risk perspective, should we be building these app things at all? Like in the future, we're all just going to walk around with these really sweet, augmented reality goggles, right, and look super cool doing it, and no, but really, should we? Like, or maybe it just belongs to virtual assistants. Like, we're going to use our voice for everything. The future app is no app, as I've heard people say. And I've had one of these in my house for a couple years. I don't know about you, but like, Alexa drives me nuts. Like, I get very little value out of this other than an overpriced Bluetooth speaker that I can tell to play my music, and half the time it gets it right. That's not to say they're not going to get better, they're not going to get smarter, blah, blah, blah. But like, even Alexa has an app. Have you thought about that? Like, so, here's this revolutionary device. It's supposed to, save us. And some people are like, oh, we don't need apps anymore. And then they build an app for Alexa. Like, come on. So as it turns out, Alexa doesn't have a screen. Right? I've heard, I don't know if they've done this yet or not. I should have looked that up before this talk. But I've heard they're going to have some device that adds a screen, essentially. Someone's nodding. Phil's nodding here. So, but I think it's an important thing. And as it turns out, these kind of ad hoc visual interfaces are extremely efficient. Think about this. If I ask Alexa, hey, what's the weather going to be like today? Sure, what am I going to get back? I'm going to get like, the highs and the lows for that day, and whether it's going to rain or not, basically. And that's it. Like, in the amount of time it takes me to speak that and get that information back, I can tap the little icon for weather on my Android device and get a wealth of information that I can consume entirely before she's even done talking. I get, 10-day forecast. I can visually see which days are going to be cloudy, which ones aren't. Like, there's a tremendous amount of value there. I can get air quality. I can get... at a glance, right? We're really good at absorbing visual information. And as it turns out, so that concept in and of itself is extremely efficient. And for that reason alone, they're not going away. Like, if you can create a customized UI to help me do the very thing that you designed it to do, that's always going to be better than, hey, Alexa, right? Now, that's not to say that there isn't value in that. I think as usual, new technologies come out, everyone says, oh, this is going to be the greatest thing ever, when really it just ends up augmenting what was already there. So now we've got new entry points into our apps, right? And that's a great thing. And we need to think of our apps more as services that like help people do things, right? So if part of that is being able to ask, tell Alexa that you want to order coffee at Starbucks, then great. Like, I'm not saying don't make those things. I'm just saying they're additive, right? So, yet somehow, despite the efficiency of apps, I don't know about you folks, but I'm kind of apped out. What I mean by that, and there's some research article that came out in the US where basically they said that on average, US adults install 0 new apps per month. So how do these things make sense? I just said apps are awesome and efficient, yet no one's doing this, right? So like, what sucks about apps? Well, for one, downloading them sucks. Right? Like who wants to go make that hop, search for the thing you're trying to find, click the thing, and wait for the 150 megabytes to download, and then boot, right? Updating them certainly sucks. Like, it's kind of silly how many apps I have installed on my phone that I'll never open again that are constantly getting updated. Like, and it turns out the reason I have them on my phone is because I don't want to manage them. Like, this is a concern that I, as a user, I don't care. Like, we used to care. No, don't get me wrong. We absolutely used to care. When I first got my first iPhone and I could first install third-party apps, my home screen was beautiful. You know, everything was perfectly arranged. It was all like, and I was excited when they added folders. And I could make beautiful little folders. Like, ooh, I can still have everything. But like now, I don't care at all. Right? We actually don't care how they get there. And how it gets there doesn't make it more or less of an app. Your pre-installed calculator app, no one would argue that that's an app. Of course it's an app, right? Now, so we really only care, are they there when we actually need them? Right? That's literally all I care about with an app. So as an example, I like to mountain bike, and I like to track my rides using this app called Strava, right? And when I get on my bike, about the last thing I do is I go, oh crap, I gotta record my ride. Okay, and I pull my phone out with my glove on, and I say, okay, Google, open Strava, and I like clumsily tap the thing to record it. But when I speak those words, like, I don't care where it was before then. Like, I literally do not care if it was even on my app, even on my phone at all. Like, the only thing I care about is at that point, is it there? Context is everything with apps. Do you agree? Right? I mean, is this just my experience? Like, I care so little about like how they got there, right? And if I'm at a parking meter, as was mentioned before, Candace said the same thing, like I want the app for that thing right then, right? If I'm in Portland visiting, as I was for the weekend 3 years ago, and I installed the public transit app, and it sat on my phone for the next 3 years getting updated. Why? Like, so as soon as I leave, I certainly don't want it anymore. Right? And if I'm at a conference, sure, maybe there's some conference app. Great. You know, during that one day, I can do that. But I absolutely do not want that thing as soon as I've left. Right? In that case, it's not even going to get updated. Like, why bother? Right? So the point I'm trying to make with all this is, like, the more ad hoc something is, the more for this, the more specific it is, the better it is for users. Right? The more disposable it is and the reinflatable it is, the better. I mean, honestly, if I bought a brand new phone and it didn't have Strava installed on it, and I said open Strava, I still want it to do the same thing. Like, why wouldn't it? Right? So, and this is another thing that I feel like developers, we tend to focus on, engagement, and we assume that everybody's going to love using our app. No, they don't. They don't want to use your app. They want to be done using your app. Now, there are exceptions to this. If your app's purpose is to entertain, yeah, absolutely. Like, they want to be using it. That's why they opened it. But in many cases, the apps that most of us are building, we're helping a user do something. Like, let's just do it. Get done. Like, time on site is a useless metric to me, right? Like, did I help the user do the thing that I'm setting out to do? And how quickly did I help them do that? The faster, the better. Okay, so you've heard a lot of talk about these PWAs. And I'm going to give you, hopefully, a more real-world, concrete example. As Phil mentioned, I've been helping Starbucks build, I think I can say this publicly, a PWA. And I've been working with them. They're doing a lot of stuff, switching stacks entirely. But as an example, the Starbucks iOS app weighs 146 megabytes on the Apple iStore, or on iStore, the App Store right now. And if you've heard any of my other talks, I'm a super minimalist, and this is much bigger than I would like it to be, and we're doing work to do a lot of splitting and what have you. But the point is, right now the entire experience might be around 600K. As it turns out, Starbucks is kind of for, a lot of their customers who can spend $4 on a cup of coffee. It might be okay, right? But if you look at that, right, like we're talking 0.4% of the size. Like, I could download the PWA 243 times while I'm waiting to download the native app. And then I have to wait for it to install and boot. In a lot of cases, someone told me during the break, they use Twitter Lite, the PWA, instead of the native iOS app because it boots faster. That's without Service Worker, like on iOS. So like even with both of them there and installed, the PWA boots faster. Now, so they're not even on the same planet. We're talking about a completely different approach to delivering applications. And even a large web app is still a fraction of what we're doing on the native side. For example, the Facebook app is 364 megabytes. The Twitter official app is, I think, 212. I checked this morning. Could be wrong. But the point I'm trying to make here in terms of the web is that the market forces are actually really well aligned with the web right now. This is beautiful. And what I mean is very few people are downloading apps, and user acquisition is hard. It's like, yeah, we spend a lot of time in apps, but we spend a lot of time in the same 5 apps. And there's all sorts of data to prove that. And those are all apps that you already know by heart. If you're a new entrant trying to earn a space on that sacred home screen, and you think that they're going to use it every day, for one, you're going to spend a lot of money, because it's expensive, getting them, acquiring the user, and then even then, keeping them engaged so they actually get into that realm of those 5 apps that they'll actually use is incredibly difficult. Think about this in perspective from a hypothetical coffee company, right? So in the Starbucks example, like if your goal is to acquire new rewards program members, which is part of what they do with their app, is, think about the difference. If I'm at the back of the line at Starbucks and I decide, oh, hey, I should probably sign up for the rewards. Like all of a sudden you start to see where the magic happens here, right? Because if I have to go download an app and I have to stand, like I'm not going to have it installed by the time I get to the front. Like I'm not. It's not going to happen. Especially if it's trying to connect to the in-store Wi-Fi, you get some Wi-Fi situation going on. Like, and then here you start to see the business value, right? Like, whereas if you can literally just pop it open, like, ka-ching, So this has mostly been covered, so I can kind of gloss over it. And it was going to be super quick anyway, but Progressive Web App, obviously PWA stands for Progressive Web Apps, or as I like to call them, web apps. I honestly, right now, for the time being, the progressive is useful for making a delineation. But I would argue, and I kind of hate myself for this slide, because I've been trying to build these for like 7 years. But the truth is, before PWAs, there really were no real apps using the definition I just described, what a user sees, right, on the web. Like, we're there, though. Like, this is happening. And as Alex Russell said, it's really just a website that took all the right vitamins, right? And I think that's pretty accurate. So Service Worker, HTTPS, and a manifest that describes all these nice details about your app. What are the icons I should use? What's the name of it? What should be the short name that appears when they add it to their home screen? What are the categories? They just added categories, which is kind of neat. So you can add metadata about your app. And the point in this, some people would argue this, but I would say that you can now build PWAs that are indistinguishable from their native counterparts. I'm going to go out on a limb and say that. And the reason I say that is I can just show you an example. You install 2 apps side by side. One of them's a web app. One of them's a native app. Hand it to average Joe Blow user who isn't a web developer who knows that the boot screen looks slightly different on a PWA. You can literally build the same experience. Like, you can do this, especially on Android devices, and as I'm going to get to, there's other things here, right? But the money is here. Like, they can be up and running in a fraction of the time, and they can be saved at the user's discretion. You don't have to, it's not a prerequisite anymore. That's huge. You don't have to make them go jump and install that thing. It's not a prerequisite before it gets on your, like, you can just use it and never save it and you're good. Like, in a conference app situation, like, I would save it for a day or two, but like, most likely I wouldn't even save it, right? But that is really useful. So you can create these really great kind of ad hoc experiences, like I was saying. And that can be cold started on a whim. Cold started meaning it was not installed before. And truth is, a lot of these are faster even if they have both been installed, right? I just love this quote. PWAs are the biggest thing to happen to the mobile web since the iPhone. And we got a real browser on the web. You know why I love this quote so much? Who quotes themselves? Like, who quotes themselves? I could have just told you that instead. Anyway, so all that stuff aside, so let's talk about this whole crazy IoT thing. I actually won that quiz. I'm like super excited. I get this like web USB thing to play with. So I'm gonna go do that. But you know, I think this combination is just magical. Like this makes perfect sense because as Kenneth said, one app per smart device doesn't really make sense. Like, yeah, okay, if I have a Nest thermostat and Philips Hue at home, yeah, sure, I have two apps, that might be fine. That's not the world we're heading into. Like, that's not going to happen. And so, you know, this whole idea of being able to have context-aware, like nearby apps, whether it's a Bluetooth, whether it's USB, whether it's physical web, what have you, is super useful for all kinds of stuff. Like, the thermostat thing is classic, right? But what if my brother is house sitting for me when I'm gone and he like wants to set the thermostat? Like being able to have something that's context aware, that's like close, makes so much more sense. And that he doesn't involve him installing Nest, the app, and then signing in as me. Like, so you know, and this goes for all kinds of things. Like you hear people like joking that they went to their house to go and they couldn't figure out how to turn on the lights, and then their friends, oh, you have to download the app to do it. I'm like, oh, it's like so dumb, right? And so anyway, this whole context thing you can use for all kinds of stuff. This classic stupid coffee maker example that actually makes no sense, but regardless, and the whole like in-store shopping thing. You know, like some of these big stores in the U.S. are providing apps for while you're there. Like, it makes perfect sense for those to be PWAs. Conference app. I already said that. So, if you've ever read like an investment proposal, there's this statement. They're like, this section contains forward-looking statements. They may or may not happen, so here's my disclaimer. Here's what I think is going to happen, right? So I think we're going to see this come out. I know of a few PWA-only startups, but I think we're going to see this happen a lot more, just because the pure efficiency of it. You know, if you can build an experience that essentially provides the same thing for Android users with easier onboarding, like for Android, it's a no-brainer. Like, there's very few good use cases for building a native Android app these days. Like, very few. If you think your app requires a native Android app, go look to make sure that it actually does, because odds are you can do an awful lot of things that you don't think you can do. Right? There's an amazing array of APIs available to us today. Additionally, I think we're going to see this start to happen. So, the truth of it is, we've been training users ever since they got smartphones to go get their apps from an app store, right? So regardless of if we have an amazing web app that's available on the internet, people are still going to do this, right? That's not going away. There's a really simple solution to this. You list them. And so Microsoft has already said that they're going to do this multiple times. They haven't even finished implementing Service Worker. And they're out there going, hey, we're going to make PWAs like available on our Windows Store. Like, this is happening. If you think about it from their perspective, why wouldn't they? All of a sudden, you build a PWA that's amazing for Android. Hey, guess what? You got a Windows Phone app. It's a no-brainer. It really is. And so, of course they're supportive of this. And that's why yeah, of course they're going to do it. Why wouldn't they? And I would say, you know, that we have some clues about this. Again, totally forward-looking statements here. But I would say the writing's on the wall for Google to do the same thing, specifically for these reasons. Who's heard of Web APK? Okay, for those of you who don't know what that is, basically it's this idea, and this is stable in Chrome as of like last week. Like it finally hit stable. It's everywhere now, on all latest Android versions, not just Oreo. But basically what happens is when you add an app to your home screen, a PWA to your home screen, it will literally create an APK file. If you're not familiar with Android development, that is an app file for Android. So what that means is it will create one on the fly and install it on the device. And that thing knows that it should open your URL. And it also goes and updates the web manifest every once in a while. So you can actually do things like update the app icon after the fact. You publish a new web app manifest, and you're going to get a new icon. And so you can still update it after the fact, which is pretty sweet. In addition, that means it shows up in your battery usage indication. So you can do things like, you can see them listed there. Oh, my PWA used this much battery life. Whereas before, they were literally just bookmarks. And that's why they wouldn't show up in like the app drawer. If you open the app drawer on Android, like they weren't listed there, but now they are, because they're actually apps to the operating system. Minor distinction, but it's important. And the reason I say the writing's on the wall is, guess what? Normally, so these are managed by Google Play Services. Normally, if you want to sideload an app on Android, what do you have to do? You have to flip the little switch in settings that say trust or allow installs from untrusted sources. Guess how they get around that? They do it from a trusted source. So like literally, they're already processing these things. They're already consuming and updating web app manifests. Like doesn't it seem logical? I'm sure there's, I don't know, maybe someone at Google's gonna get mad at me for even predicting this might happen, but whatever. I think this is gonna happen. And this, so remember in the beginning how I said that with no developers, you don't have a platform? So what happens if people stop installing apps on iOS? Like you better believe Apple is aware of the number of app installs, right? And you better bet they're paying attention. Now, I am of the opinion it makes perfect sense, even though it might be in their best interest to drag their feet as long as possible. But I very loudly blogged and complained about and switched to Android as a result entirely of web stuff. And I had 80,000 hits on that thing in like 2 days. And I was told it was passed around by Google management to the entire company. So like, those kinds of things do not make Apple look good. They do not make Apple happy. Ask Ken Wheeler if he's going to switch to a Pixel when it comes out, the Pixel 2. Serious, he's going to. That's what he told me. Anyway, so they've officially said they're going to implement Service Worker. Now, the question is, how much of the rest of the kind of app-like experience stuff are they actually going to implement? I don't know. But again, I think don't underestimate your influence as developers and your value as developers to these platforms. The louder you are, the more reluctant you are to play their game, the better off the web is going to be as a result. So really, I think we're going to start seeing these things everywhere. A few fun examples inside VR experiences. This was already brought up. Imagine if you have a context-aware VR experience or augmented reality experience, and you're going to start putting URLs on everything. Like, why shouldn't those URLs be PWAs? Like, if I want an experience to interact with that smart parking meter, like, of course, like, just make it an iframe with a freaking PWA in it that it lets me, with an experience optimized for that thing. Like, why not? I think we're going to see them inside chatbots. Remember when chatbots were going to take over the world? Yeah, did that happen? Like, who's ordered pizza using a chatbot? We got 1, 2, okay. Oh, all right, great. But like, I think it makes perfect sense, again, to say, hey, I want to order a pizza. Okay, well, here's an experience that lets you place your order without having this long conversation. Give me this efficient, optimized experience for doing that thing, right? Also, what? Xbox? So I was looking at the Service Worker item inside Microsoft Edge's like platform news thing. Basically, they have a user voice account where you can go vote on specific features. And I noticed this. It says, it's Service Worker is in development for Microsoft Edge on desktop, mixed reality, mobile, and Xbox. I'm like, yes, that's awesome. Anyway, so also, as I kind of already alluded to, inside virtual assistants. Again, open Strava, right? Like, it makes perfect sense to have that be able to kind of cold boot whatever the heck it wants with very little file usage. This was kind of a fun one. As it turns out, the menu displays in the US for McDonald's are all, it's a Polymer app. It's kind of neat. I don't know if they have Service Worker or not, but it would make sense to. And this was another cool one. So as I do independent consulting, and one of the things that somebody approached me with was this like amazing sports complex they were building. And instead of buying actual like scoreboards with lights and what have you, they were just going to plaster the place with TVs and build web apps to like control the scores. I'm like, you could do so many cool things, like the music, what have you. The web is like truly this universal platform. If you have not seen this, I urge you to check it out. For those of you who think that it's all just a Google thing, it's all a giant Google conspiracy, this web thing. First of all, everyone from Microsoft would probably punch you. But secondly, there's stuff like this, right? So if basically this is continuous integration for browsers, tested against specs. And you can drill way down into all these things and see all the different tests they're running, and they give you a score. Like, how well is this browser doing? So this way, when Apple came out and they said, oh, we did IndexedDB, those of us who have actually used IndexedDB, it was pretty much useless in the beginning. There were some major bugs that didn't get fixed for a long time. And this way, if they say that, be like, actually, you didn't really ship it, did you? You know? So anyway, point is, it's really cool. So inevitably, somebody goes, well, what about this feature that I need for Unplatform Y? Again, be loud, you know? Like, Wayne Gretzky said that I skate where the puck is going. Like, to me, the writing is on the wall. Like, yeah, maybe right now, things aren't amazing on iOS. Doesn't mean you can't provide a really great experience. And clearly, there's people picking Twitter Lite over the native app, even on iOS. Chrome, yep. Firefox, up. Oh man, I should have had Samsung Internet on here. I made the slides, sorry. I made the slides before doing that. And Microsoft has made a huge commitment, and Safari, as I already talked about. So I would say be loud, make them add your feature, you know, file bugs and stuff. Like, people assume that this does nothing. It does. You don't have to be some like expert to file a bug saying, I wish we had this feature, right? Or to star it or what have you, right? Platforms need developers or they are worthless. And we have more influence than we realize. So this is just a brief aside. The people behind React Native are amazing. I love them. They mean super well. Expo.io, same thing. But like my issue with this is it's just playing their game. Like we're still playing Apple's game here in that scenario, right? You're still playing to the closed platforms. It's not about ideology. It's by protecting your investment. Like I don't want to have to play that game. I don't want to spend 30% of my revenue just to be able to put my app there. You know, and in theory, I'm not saying they would. I'm not trying to spread fear or uncertainty. Like, but in theory, they have full control. They could be like, nope, we're not going to do any more React Native apps. Right? And here's the more important thing. No one wants to download your app anyway. So it helps bridge that case where somebody's going to go search for it maybe, but anyway. So I don't really want to play their game, and that's just my take on this. So thus far, I've kind of presented all of this from this kind of heartless, selfish perspective. As it turns out, it's really not about that. That's not the whole story. There's a whole lot more to this. This isn't about me. This isn't about us. We're not, as was said earlier, I'm not building apps for me. We're building for users. I want to invest in platforms that provide that opportunity for other people. And I hope that the next freaking Mark Zuckerberg is some 12-year-old girl in Nairobi. Like, how cool would that be? You know? Yeah, thank you. And if the prerequisite is her buying an iPhone, how likely is that to happen? You know what I mean? So anyway, the web really is this kind of universal platform. It's the closest thing to a level playing field that I've ever seen in terms of tech availability. And I want to improve that platform. There's an incredible TED Talk by this guy named Anand Giridharadas. I hope I'm saying that right. But then he was interviewed about that TED Talk, and he said this, which blew my mind. He said, if you're the kind of person who tends to succeed in what you start, changing what you start could be the most extraordinary thing you could do. And I think a lot of people in this room, if they are self-motivated enough to drag their butts out here and spend money to show up and sit and listen to talks, odds are pretty good you're good at what you do. Like, this really hit home with me. I'm not saying I'm good, but like, or extra good or something. But yeah, I mean, we can all do incredible things with computers. Let's invest in that, right? So I've presented the facts as I see them. I've done my best not to shit on you. I don't know if I entirely succeeded. But I am going to keep investing in the web. And I hope you choose to do the same. But what are you going to invest in? Thank you.